The thing is, Greg, that there's such a strong pull two different ways.
Yeah.
There's a pull to ensure that we move fast because the technology is there. And if you don't apply it quickly, you're leaving opportunity on the table to improve healthcare, improve outcomes. But also, you need to be safe and effective, and you have to trust it.
The last thing I wanted to add too is like this whole IoMT approach that we're talking about, and Matt touched on this already, and Jason kind of touched on this earlier too, in that, we can create the tools, but if the clinicians don't adopt the tools and don't embed it into their clinical workflows in the most efficient manner for their system and how they work, then you're not going to achieve the benefits of it.
Hold on, that's a great point. I call it the field of dreams. If you build it, will it come? Jason,
right?
Are they coming?
It depends. Again, it depends on the workflow. It depends on how much noise there is in the signal. It depends on how well we do it implementation. I do think what I'm really pleased with, and I don't know if it's because of AI or just because we've been doing this so long that we finally realized it, that there is becoming a much more willingness in vendor partners to partner on that clinical adoption layer and actually put skin in the game around that. Because it used to be, well, here's our tool. Now you guys go operationally put it in, and if it doesn't work, it's your fault. That's really not the conversation anymore. And I think that's a really, it's an exciting time to really be working with vendors who are willing to put that skin in the game and develop what our outcomes need to be together. It's refreshing.
Welcome to Beyond the Blueprint, a podcast designed to empower healthcare professionals, enabling them to improve care delivery through integrated design and technology innovation. My name is Greg Malcury. I'm the Managing Director at Lighthouse Health Tech Advisors. Whether you're redesigning a hospital, launching a new digital initiative, or just curious about the future of healthcare, then you're in the right place. Let's explore together what's possible when we go beyond the blueprint. Now, before we dive into today's discussion, I want to recognize our valued sponsors who made Beyond the Blueprint possible, Simplify Medical. With their support, we're able to bring you insightful conversations around healthcare design and innovation. If you enjoyed today's show, I encourage you to subscribe so you never miss a future episode. On an inpatient unit, nurses are rarely focused on one patient. They're moving between rooms, they're administering medications, they're documenting care and responding to alarms. A patient can start to deteriorate while clinicians are already doing other required work. In many hospitals, the issue is no longer whether patient deterioration occurred. The bigger issue is whether the organization has an enterprise-class system to turn multiple signals into a clear priority for action. And this is where enterprise clinical surveillance begins to matter. This is not just an alarm, not another dashboard or another AI score. It's a coordination layer. It helps determine which patient needs attention first when alerts, monitoring data, clinical workload collide at the same time. Now, awareness doesn't mean that we're seeing more data. It means knowing which patients need action first, who owns the action, and whether the response actually occurred. Now, to help me unpack this really complicated topic, I'm joined by three industry thought leaders. We have Jason Atkins, the Vice President and Chief Clinical Informatics Officer at Emory Healthcare. We have Matt Grubis, the Chief Engineer from Monitoring Solutions at GE Healthcare. And we have Ryan Fox, the Digital and IoMT Strategy Lead at GE Healthcare. The core question's simple. When hospitals already have data, alerts, monitors, and now AI, why does detection still fail to become action? So with that, why don't we get started? I'm going to direct the first question to Jason. When two patients in the same unit begin to deteriorate at the same time, how does the care team decide which patients get attention first?
Well, hey, Greg, thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate it. Glad to be here with everyone on here and having a really timely and great conversation about how technology is impacting our clinicians and patients on a daily basis. And you raise a really good question about how clinicians decide to prioritize actions. I think from my perspective, clinicians are very good at understanding which action to take first once They have a good understanding of where that information is coming from. When they see the patient in front of them and they're able to assess all of that information, assess the patient, and really understand what's going on. The problem becomes when you have all these different flows of information coming all at once. And I am in a situation where I am helping a patient who is impulsive and is about to get out of bed and they're about to fall. And then another information stream is coming to me, maybe from a patient care tech who is saying, I just got an alert from Miss Davis in room 212 that she may be getting septic. And that information may come from the tech in various ways, right? They may tell you, well, this patient's respiratory rate is up and their temperature's up a little bit. Or they may just come to you and say, I just got a sepsis alert. Now it's, you go do what you need to do as the nurse. And that's where it becomes problematic because clinicians are going to prioritize the immediate need most of the time over what may be a subtle indicator of slowly progressing deterioration. And I think that's where, our conversation today is really going to take us is how do we separate that signal from the noise? How do we make sure that clinician is getting the right information at the right time?
That's a great point. I know when I've roamed the halls of Stanford, my wife's a nurse there, she has something they call the paper brain, right? So it's in her back pocket, and that's how they determine who their patients are and what their priorities are. There's a lot of this stuff just done in their head, and they're just using their own clinical judgment and experience to determine what their priorities are and when they need to act.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it's very manual right now because we don't have this stream of information feed that's
Yeah,
available to the clinician at any time,
yeah.
right? So they're going to have one feed of information over here in this room, another feed of information in this room. They're having to manually process that at that specific time. So yeah, it's very manual. It's very cumbersome. It's hard to separate that signal from the noise. And I think that's why we continue to have deterioration because at first it looks like slow and then all of a sudden it hits while I'm doing something else.
And Jason, I'd double down on that. Working for GE Healthcare and building patient monitoring systems, I'm really good at getting you data. Maybe not all the data is equal, and maybe it's actually not information yet. So as time has gone on, we figured out how to measure more parts of the human physiology. We do it at higher rates. We do it at higher fidelity. And you know what? We're sometimes, I think, overwhelming our customers with data. And now bringing it together to make it actionable intelligence is that next frontier that we're working on.
Yeah, that's a great comment because all of these devices in the rooms, they do their job extremely well. Whether it's a hemodynamic monitor or a cardiac monitor, they all do what they intend to do really well. The problem is they add another layer of potential noise. And regardless of that device, when it sends an alarm, if that alarm is right 100% of the time, it's still within an atmosphere or an ecosystem of 100 other alerts that I have to filter through. So until we can get all these devices and putting them into a common stream of information and able to filter that information for all of that nurse's patients or all of that physician's patients to say, this is the thing you should consider right now, along with all these other things, that's when we're going to get this ecosystem of,
If I've been a nurse for 30 years, am I willing to give up in the way I've been trained and my pride I have in my ability to manage these different workloads? Is it hard to change old habits?
Absolutely. Have you talked? You said your wife was a nurse. Have you ever tried to change her habit? I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're all, I don't like change. Most people don't like change. Clinicians really don't like change, especially if they don't have, a basis for trust of the information that is being fed to them.
I do
I
feel like
want to get
today's
Ryan involved.
environment.
Hey, Ryan, when hospitals try to solve the problem with yet another alert or another workflow tool, what usually falls short? I guess is part of the change management process.
Sorry, Greg, can you just repeat that question?
Yeah, so when hospitals try to solve this with yet another alert or another workflow tool, which solves like a slice, where does the approach usually fall short?
Well, and you're asking me or
Yeah,
Jason or who?
I'm asking, get your perspective on this.
Yeah, so I think today's environment, we have to kind of maybe just take a quick step back.
Yeah.
There are more alerts and alarms and things that are happening today than ever before. And it's created this environment where it's just a lot of noise. A lot of alarms and alerts could probably be reduced through alarm governance and protocols and strategies. And I think in today's staffing shortages, that aspect is really something that the nursing team is looking for. Is I think they're much more receptive to a change to their alarm and alert governance structures today than they have been. So where it falls down, I think it's not the introduction of another device or another data point. It's how can we consolidate? How can we help the systems that are in place today work more efficiently together and effectively reduce that cognitive burden on the nursing or clinical staff and give that time back to them. And I think the whole promise of IoMT is essentially that it's systems that have been designed to not natively communicate directly with each other are not the most efficient design, historically, but they protected data very well, which accomplished that mission very, very successfully. Now we're trying to break down those silos and say these devices should be working hand in hand together, and being able to communicate natively together without a middle layer can help streamline the care, the alarms, the alerts, the protocols, et cetera, all in a much better way.
Hey,
So,
Matt, I
Brian,
want to
I agree with
get,
that. If you don't mind, Greg, I
go
think
ahead.
one of the things, you mentioned change management, which I think is a big piece of success of an implementation. I think one of the things that we don't do well, probably speaking from the academic medical system perspective, is the initial environment assessment. So when we have a medical device or a new application coming into the environment, we do a pretty good job of looking at that device or that system and how well it's going to work and developing workflows around that thing. What we don't do is the full ecosystem assessment of how adding this one thing layers on more more noise to everything that already exists. And we don't, like, Ryan mentioned alarm and an alert burden. We have no national structure to say, how do we assess the comprehensive number of alarms and alerts that are going to a clinician and what's too much? We have no way to do that. And I think that's a big piece of what we're going to have to look at as we start layering on more and more devices, more and more technology, is not just looking at making that one thing successful, but how do we make the whole ecosystem successful when we do layer that on?
Just out of curiosity, at Emory, do you have a crawl, walk, run strategy? Hey, look, let's try this in a single department, or did you go enterprise wide in just implementing the technologies you have and spending the time of trying to divorce certain standards across your organization?
It's both and. We try to have a crawl, walk, run strategy. I think sometimes it depends on the device and how well it has been used in production systems and other places versus how new is it or how cutting edge is it. It also is sometimes dependent upon how well we can partner with vendors on a low or no cost pilot, and how much all in are we on a new thing, and um, does the ROI come from getting to scale faster, or can we show that ROI in a small pilot and then work with the vendor on what our KPIs are and then move that out faster? A lot of times we don't always have vendors that will partner with us um, on that scale strategy and put skin in the game to do that. We're going to need that.
Hey, Matt, hospital have signals coming from multiple places. We have monitors, we got EHR alerts, we got nurses, now AI. Um, what's missing to turn the signals into a prioritized clinical work queue, right? So we have
Exactly.
going on. If I overload the nurse, I give her like a few additional patients. I can create cognitive dissonance, but from a technology perspective, what kind of tools are being added, or what kind of approach do you have to be able to help facilitate this within an organization?
Yeah, and Ryan mentioned it earlier, this concept of the IoMT or the Internet of Medical Things. And really what we're trying to do, it's less about, Jason, the device at the bedside, but it's the body of evidence that we can collect. When you think about a patient monitor at the bedside collecting 4 or 5 physiological signals, it has this view of the patient through its front end. And so any processing and analytics that's done inside the monitor only understands what it's acquiring. The goal that we have to do to raise the cognitive intelligence or reduce the cognitive workload is really provide a holistic view of the patient, just like the nurse does, just like the nurse can take a look at the different data feeds and understand what's going on. But what we're trying to do with IOMT, it's like making sure that your your thermostat is connected with the phase of the sun and understanding that, hey, it's morning now. The house is going to start to heat up. Maybe I should turn on the air conditioner and the fan a little bit higher. It's bringing perspective to the data that we acquire that's not just acquired by that one device. And this is where that concept of the Internet of Medical Things comes together. Bringing that data together, we can now provide analytics that looks across the patient, look across the care continuum, across the care pathway, things that we haven't been able to do before.
Excellent. Jason, when a deteriorating patient is communicated through paging, EHR messaging, or informal conversation, which is typical across the country, what often fails as it relates to the receipt, the prioritization of the follow-up actions, right? In terms of clinical collaboration. So that's probably been part of your journey. Maybe you could talk about the evolution of where you were from the technologies you used and kind of where you are right now.
Sure. So I think, there's several failure points in there. One, it could be, I am just distracted from that signal. Like we talked about earlier, I've got a patient who's actively falling. I get a signal on another patient in another room, and I just can't do anything about it right at that moment. And then maybe I forget because I keep getting distracted by a physician request or, a family that needs some information. There's also the issue of maybe not understanding what the next action should be. We've got these things in our electronic medical record system, and I won't mention any names, but they alert the patient, and they have language in them to try to help direct the clinician. It's really hard to. It takes a lot of thought and a lot of energy to figure out what text to put in an alert to make sure that it's very clear about what next action to take. And regardless of how you say it, you may have, 5 really experienced nurses that can decipher it, and then one brand new nurse just out of residency that thinks it means something completely different, and they miss the action. So there's a lot of different layers about what could and may not potentially happen. I think our evolution has been really trying to focus on human-centered design and working with the clinicians to understand what problem we're trying to solve, the large amounts of data and information coming to them, how to surface that information to them in a way that is useful, makes it very clear what the next action is supposed to be, who is responsible for that next action, and then how do we monitor to make sure that next action actually happens. And we're trying to mature on that. It's really challenging, though. It's very difficult because there's always these, Swiss cheese holes that can fall through the cracks, and the next action doesn't actually.
Maybe give us a couple examples of what some of those holes in the cheese are.
So I mean, like I mentioned earlier, it is. Do you have a middleman that is surfacing the information? Is the alert going to the right person? So if you've got a patient care tech who's taking vital signs, and those vital signs are above a certain trigger, and that tech gets the alert, does that tech understand where they're supposed to take it next? Right? And can they communicate what was in that alert to the next person they're supposed to take it to? That's one. Another one would be, let's say you decide, okay, the tech is taking the vital signs. We're not going to alert the tech. We're going to alert the nurse because they're the one that can take the action. But the nurse is off doing something else, and they're not actually in the electronic medical record where the alert shows up. So they're taking care of patients, administering medications, doing whatever the case may be. They don't go into that patient's record for 15 minutes. Now that alert pops up, but that patient's already past that initial deterioration and they've progressed into something more critical. So there's timing, there's responsibility, there's clarity of action. All of those are some of the Swiss cheese holes that actions can fall through.
Unbelievable. Hey, Ron, maybe talk from a perspective of the enterprise surveillance tools, how they're actually helping filling the holes of the Swiss cheese. To take on Jason's example of helping with the coordination, because in an ICU, right, we could have many clinicians that are involved, right, and it's all kind of lockstep based on evidence-based medicine. But is there a need for an overriding tool that it can help coordinate the everything so that that patient doesn't go into sepsis, right? Because we've been able to identify it 5 hours early, right?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different ways to answer that depending on the care setting and the urgency of the alert or the alarm that's being generated. But first, I just want to address kind of what the environment is that we're talking about here. We talked briefly about staffing shortages earlier, but the piece that often the conversation doesn't turn to is that there's actually a loss of experience that's happening within the clinical teams as well. People are either aging out and they're retiring from the industry, or they're looking for opportunities to maybe move into things like away from the bedside, but they still feel that connection to the bedside. And so we see them moving into more of like centralized monitoring units or CMUs. Or supporting virtual nursing. And I think those are critically important in the future state of healthcare to help support those younger nurses that are coming in that are maybe less experienced. Jason mentioned, a resident that's coming in and maybe hasn't had the years and years or decades of experience that others have. So I think that's critically important. So to answer your question, there's different ways to kind of approach different care settings in different areas, but I would see virtual nursing, central monitoring units. Those are just a couple of the key areas. I think the promise of IoMT is that, as Matt was talking about this earlier, adding additional context into the data streams that are coming in. And so now you've got context that's being pulled in from multiple different sources that are adding to the volume of information to help kind of minimize that cognitive burden on those clinical teams. It's not to come back and say, hey, an alarm was created and this is exactly what you're supposed to do. It's to help the clinical team not go and hunt and peck for all the additional information that they need to make a decision on what's most clinically relevant for their patient.
Can you go into a little more detail about the IoMT and the type of intelligence that IoMT brings to these very complex environments?
Yeah. Matt, do you want to start? And
Yeah.
kind of where my head was thinking is like on the first basic level, like for years and years, we've had all these different disparate systems from different vendors that just don't natively talk to each other. And so just being able to create that layer of communication between the systems is kind of one critical piece of this whole IoMT ecosystem.
Absolutely. It's bringing the data together on the same data plane so that we can operate and have those algorithms and analytics and AI that can help triage the situation. Now, I think it's not about creating more events. It's not about creating more notifications on your phone. I mean, today, look at the notifications you get on your phone that's in your pocket. Whether it's two-factor authentication where you have to enter a 6-digit code, or if it's your reservation's ready and you should check in for your airline. You should maybe you're worried about something at work is popping up, or your family's having a crisis. All these are coming to the same phone, and it's always beeping and buzzing you at all the time. But which ones do you have to know are more important? You wish that there was some intelligence there that said, hey, this is going to beep a little different of a way. And this is something I really need to pay attention to because I've looked at your situation. I know where you are. I know what's going on. And this is a message that you need to read. And don't worry about the advertisement for the hardware store today because Father's Day is coming up, whatever it might be. So this is the kind of intelligence that we are bringing to IoMT. It's not about providing more events and more alarms and more ways to view it. It's about bringing clinical information when it's needed, where it's needed. And that's what we're doing to drive down this kind of noise and nuisance level that the nurses are given. And that comes right to adoption, just like you're saying, Jason. If we're going to adopt something like this technology in the patient care area, it's not about adding another alarm. It's about the nurses trusting that when they do get an alarm or a message, that is actionable and it's going to help them. It might be something that they're not aware of and they might have missed.
Hold on.
And it has, sorry, Greg, but
go
and
ahead.
that the context thing is really important. So, it's about surfacing the right information at the right time to the right person, but with the right context. Because if you just, you just show an alert to a clinician, but you don't give them the opportunity to say what fed that
Why?
alert, the why, and maybe some potential actions that they should be considering, you kind of lose the fidelity. You don't want to be overly prescriptive, but you do want to give that context. I think that's a really important comment.
Why is AI making enterprise surveillance kind of more urgent? But it's also creating a lot more noise, right? We already had X number of different alarms going off at the bedside. And now with clinical surveillance, I think last I knew about Epic, they had 25 different algorithms, right? So there's a lot of noise coming in. Is there even more of a need to have a platform layer to be able to be the traffic cop?
I think it's less about the plan. Well, so I'm gonna differ a little bit there. I think it's less
All
about
right, let's do it, Jason.
We like to pose views here. Go on.
so the platform is really important, like you just talked about, right? Setting the context and removing the noise. But as an informaticist, to me, it's all about the workflow. It's all about setting the expectations for that, clinician being in the middle of what are the clinical processes and policies and accountabilities that clinician is supposed to take from that information that is being set on that platform. And we have to do a better job of making sure that the workflows are not cumbersome. They don't have too much cognitive burden on the clinician. Just adding another device or adding another platform won't help if we don't have the workflow behind it. And I know you know that, Matt, and you weren't going to say that, but I think maybe sometimes we focus too much on the tool and not enough on the process of the use of the tool.
Yeah, and I think also, I think when we say, is there another platform? I think there is the EMR platform, but the EMR platform is going to provide notifications based off of, is a clinical protocol being followed? Is it time to do X, Y, or Z? Should you be, with medicine interactions? There are a lot of AI that the EMR has introduced, but the other area where the EMR has not introduced, and I think it's not maybe even their scope to introduce when it comes to physiological monitoring, when it comes to that raw data that's being produced from the devices that are surrounding the patient, providing clinical data. That's another platform and layer that also needs to we're bringing AI to that arena so that it's not just the burdens for the EMR processes and the clinical processes, but also the jarring alarms that are saying your heart rate's too high or SpO2 is too low, or whatever it might be. It needs to bring all that together. And those are, I think, separate, but they have to be platforms that do work together over the future. Otherwise, again, you don't want to have all these different platforms doing the same thing.
Hold on, this is a great topic. What happens when the AI and the bedside assessment actually disagree? How do you resolve that? Because we had a podcast a couple weeks ago. We were talking about shadow AI. I live in Stanford Mafia country. All the docs are telling me how they use it at point of care, right?
Yeah.
And I go, look, I'm here at 12, 15 hours. It's convenient to just use ChatGPT to be able to give me some insights to just jog my memory on, how to best support a patient. So what are your thoughts on this,
I have lots of thoughts, but Ryan, if you wanted to say something, go ahead.
Well, just in terms of shadow AI or AI in general?
Well, AI is is making a lot of traction in industry. I was just at the annual AMDIS conference, and I'll be honest with you, the overall tone in the room was quite bullish, which is much different than last year, right? It looks like AI is starting to find its footing. So there's a real opportunity as we go from shadow AI, which is the use of doctors using their own tools, toward more organizationally deployed solutions that are taking into consideration data and AI governance, right? So I think we're at a real pivotal point right now, and I guess places like Emory are putting strategies in place to be able to take advantage of that. Maybe we could talk to where are we today? Jason, are you pretty bullish on where the state of technology is, and where do you see things going?
I am bullish, but cautiously. Yeah, and I say that carefully because I think we're going to be at the human in the loop phase for quite a while, and we should be. Um, I make the analogy of what do you do when you have a human clinician, expert clinician, or not an expert clinician who makes a decision differently than AI? Who wins? Right now, the human always wins, but we have to have a monitoring process to evaluate was that the right decision at the right time. And if the AI made the wrong decision, how do we continue to train it so that it makes the right decision? If the human made the wrong decision, how do we reinforce what the right decision was and reinforce that maybe you should have considered this suggestion a little bit more. But I think the analogy is it's no different than if I, as a human clinician, disagree with the article I just read, right? Maybe that article has wonderful evidence about what the right thing to do is, but I don't trust it for some reason and I lean on my experience. It's the same with AI, right? We have to figure out ways to understand what we're benchmarking AI against so that we say, how often is this AI going to be right or wrong? And then we have to have monitoring and sustainment programs to evaluate those decisions in close to real time so that we can just continue to make it better. And it being the AI or the clinician's decision making process.
Yeah, I think it comes down to trust. It really comes down to trust in my perspective. And the reason for me to say that is we live in an age of misinformation and disinformation that is running rampant throughout media, social media, all aspects. So the scary part for me is that if clinicians or any person is just blindly trusting the output that they get from AI, it has the potential to be what's called hallucinating in AI, where it's, inferring its own results or its own output. And so it really comes down to trust. You have to, as Jason said, maybe there's a great new peer-reviewed published article out there, but you need to balance the weight of evidence and the body of evidence against, the other sources that you trust to be providing the most accurate and relevant information for you. And so there's different layers of AI that can be introduced, and we've seen things like digital AI scribes. I think a lot of those are really great. Help the clinician really focus on the conversation. We use digital AI here at work to, record meetings and take notes and create action items for people, and it's increased the productivity. But I think when we start talking about clinical decision making and the corresponding AI, trust comes in the form of ensuring that PHI is not leaking out of our organization into that tool. It comes down to, are we making the right decisions based on non-hallucinations, but actual peer-reviewed, published, factual, guidelines and evidence that exist out there from the scientific bodies that we trust. So multiple different ways to kind of apply it. I think the way that we really think about it in the context of this IoMT is taking the information, consolidating it, and helping to kind of streamline it so that clinicians don't have to go to many different disparate systems and figure out what is all the data telling me. So really trying to just help.
Yeah. I'm bullish on AI. I think AI and where the advancements are coming so quickly in the base models over the past 18 months has been incredible. But I do not think there will be one big AI where we're just going to feed it all this information and it's going to give you the answer. What I see as the future is AI agents that are really good at something specific, really good at detecting sepsis, really good at understanding your cardiac stability, really good at watching the clinical protocol, really good at different care elements of the patient. And we'll trust those. We'll start to build this fleet, these of agents that are good at what they do. And then you can apply more of the summarization and have sort of your virtual intensivist that's asking all these AIs, hey, is their heart good? Are they breathing okay? Have they gotten the right medicine? Have they, how's their renal function? And then that starts to come together from these agents that are focused on different parts of the system. It's never going to be just like feed all this information to one big AI master, and it's going to tell you how to take care of a patient. It'll be stepwise into that framework and architecture. But the IoMT ecosystem has to be the predecessor to that, because you need reliable, truthful, and holistic information to make sure you have the right outcomes.
Excellent. That was really well put. All right, guys, we're actually out of time, but we're going to have one lightning round at the end here, right? Because you guys are that smart. Each of you guys has 30 seconds to provide our informatics viewership some piece of advice, some takeaway from today that you'd like them to keep in mind as it relates to enterprise surveillance. Jason, why don't you start us off?
I'll go back to using human-centered design, really focusing on the problem you're trying to solve, and focusing on developing a human-centered workflow where the technical tools output is fed through a workflow where there is defined responsibility and accountability, defined action, a defined monitoring and sustainment program. Because without that workflow aspect, the tools are just going to put more information out there that the clinicians are either not going to be able to use or not trust to use. So focusing on the workflow and human-centered design is, I think, that's a really important aspect for
Great. Thanks, Jason. Ryan, you're up.
Man, I was hoping you'd go to Matt next, but
We
I'll
could have Matt
answer it.
first if you want.
No, I was just joking. I love what Jason just said. I think that's absolutely right. I tend to focus a lot on the macroeconomics of just what's happening to our health system across the entire country. And let's recognize that, the predicted staffing shortages are not going away. The predicted aging population is not going away. And so any new tool, technology, device, approach, you should always be considering, how is this going to help reduce cognitive burden, give time back to my clinicians, and promote a healing environment for our patients and our clinicians alike. And I think if you really center on those key aspects, I think you'll be able to find some opportunities here through IoMT.
Awesome. All right, Matt.
All right. So my friends in the IT, IS world, it's a partnership between us. It really is. As we step into this together, we're merging together the devices at the bedside and IoMT ecosystem in your ecosystem. I always approach things, and I know you do too, always considering risk. So for me, as we're developing these systems and these analytics and the data stores and making sure it's safe and effective, I'm always thinking about what is my mission critical aspect of the system, what is important, and then what is supportive. And I work very hard to make sure I work with you to make sure that your infrastructure is ready to support that 5 nines of reliability for where that really counts, making sure that patient's safe and the nurse can handle the number of patients they have at any moment. And then thinking about how we can build onto that for things that add value and reduce your cognitive workload over time. So those are very important things. Partnership, work with your patient monitoring vendor or your other vendors. It is a partnership with you, and I fully recognize this. And then also, let's look at it from a risk-based perspective and make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to support it.
Awesome. I'd like to thank you for attending and giving us your insights, Matt, Ryan, and Jason. And thanks for listening to Beyond the Blueprint. I'm Greg Malker from Lighthouse Health Tech Advisors, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks, Greg.
Can't wait. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Blueprint. Together, we're exploring how thoughtful design can simplify complexity, enhance patient care, and create meaningful change. If you found value in today's episode, make sure to subscribe and leave a review in order to help us continue the conversation. Let's reimagine healthcare together on Beyond the Blueprint.